Hi everybody, thank you for having me. I've practiced this once before, so I think I'll stick to the time. Or I hope. Today's presentation is, well, let me present the logic of it. We take a socio-technical point of view and we're looking at how life logging is changed and self-tracking is changing the psychological boundaries between the person in relation to their technology and in relation to other people. So we know that as people we have two attention between sort of the need to disclose information about ourselves. It's part of our self-expression, it's part of how we create relationships. We influence the world around us. It's necessary, it's for us. On the other hand, we want our privacy, we want time for self-reflection, we want to safeguard our autonomy. So anyway, privacy is important about, everything to do with our lives, our social identity, our self-determination, our autonomy, our overall well-being. So we looked at how can we make sense about how we manage the attention, and this is what we believe is managing the privacy. It's managing the attention between these two things. So we looked at Petronius' communication privacy management theory. I will explain what that is, to explore how life loggers manage the privacy boundaries with respect to the QS practices. So their idea is based on this. How do we manage, Petronius' idea is how we manage the tension between these two, privacy and self-disclosure. And C says that we mentally create some rules about how to manage these boundaries and how to manage the boundary ownership. Who owns that piece of information? Who owns the managing of process of managing that boundary, of disclosing and sharing and keeping private? How do we manage the boundary linkages? As in, who can disclose? If I tell you a secret, can you disclose it to somebody else? What is the agreement there? Boundary permeability, who else is allowed in the club of disclosure and who is to be left outside, put simply. And boundary turbulence. If you do something that betrays these rules, how do we sort things out? Put very, very simply. And she suggests that this is a matter of the context and what is at stake. So the rules relate to the context and to the content. There are different factors that influence these generalized rules that we create about privacy. It could be a culture thing. Some cultures are more private than others. It could be a matter of gender. Women tend to be a little bit more open and more disclosive than men. It might be a matter of motivation. So I'm telling you something, and I could be instrumental about disclosing something to you or expecting something from you. It may have to do with the context. So, I tell my health issues to my doctor because I am in the context of this professional relationship. And it could be a risk-benefit ratio. So how much do I stand to lose if I tell you something in this particular situation? What is the possibility of being harmed, my privacy harms? So how people approach context plays a catalytic role as to whether they will maintain or whether they will adapt the rules, the generalized rules about their privacy. So basically, Petronius says we have general rules, and depending on the context, we either keep the general rules or we tweak them. So we wanted to understand what's going on in the QS context with relation to the QS data. To do so, we needed to split this context, this nefarious context, a bit down into some categories in order to operationalize. So we used Coops and al. Typology of privacy. If you haven't seen this paper, it's quite interesting, especially for those. He's a legal professor. Hi. He's a legal professor, so they try to split down that context down into more specific chunks. So he talks about he separates the context down to what is the motivation of each particular zone. So in the personal zone, it's all about us negotiating the others leaving us alone, negotiating our solitude. So imagine you are an adolescent and you close the door and you keep your parents out because you just want to be left on your own. And this is important for your self-reflection and self-development and find yourself. So it's the kind of space that you need to introspect, and it's between you and God. Nobody else should know. So the intimate zone is how we negotiate the relationship with partners, sexual or other, or family, and very, very kind of close friends, intimate relationship. And it's part of our personal development as social beings. We need to keep other people, some people out and some people close to define who we are and therefore who we are not. So we need to have this boundary. The semi-private no is about negotiating of self-image. So right here, right now, I take full responsibility about saying what I'm saying, and eponymously, not anonymously. I take responsibility for what I'm saying right now. So it's part of my social image or my professional image, right? And it's, but I don't want this to be abused. There's an expectation that we're going to be respectful as professionals, for example, right, about what is communicated here. That is not going to be misattributed. And there are rules of conduct and policies and norms about this relationship. And of course, there's this public zone. So if I take my book and I sit in some bench, in the park, I don't want people to come and hustle me. I want to be left alone in public view. And there is what we call civil inattention. Nobody will come and invade my privacy space, even though I'm in full show in the park, right? There are some conventions about that. So we took this kind of sort of splitting down of context and tried to figure out what's happening with QS. We looked at 10 different cases from the QS community, like the QS meetups. We did semi-private, semi-structured interviews and used content analysis for what I'm going to present. So to create the generalized views about privacy, the following sort of notions came through from our analysis. Some people saw it as a transactional view of privacy. So considering that the view was, there is no point to strive for privacy in today's technological world. So give it up, basically. Or I'm actually going to get something back if I give out my data, so I might as well. This is modern society. Some took a risk and benefit perspective and saw privacy as the outcome of weighting the risk of privacy harms against the relational benefits of disclosure. So if I say, I was right, I did my jogging last year and I achieved 10, this kind of achievement, and I post it on Facebook, do I wait up, or I'm going to get how many likes I'm going to get on Facebook, as opposed to keeping in private that it actually did this run in that park? What do I stand to lose versus how many likes I get? So for other people, it was a matter of, it's part of who I am. I'm an open person, right? I'm an open person, I want to see myself as an open person, therefore I'm just saying, I'm just posting stuff on Facebook. I'm just publicizing things on Strava. And others took the view, which is also a legal kind of view, that nothing to hide. What do I need to hide, where I did my round? There's nothing to hide. I did nothing wrong. Why should I hide? So it's not my priority. I don't care. But what happens, how do they tweak this rule in relation to the QS? And how do they relate with, in the personal sphere, in the intimate sphere, the semi-private, and the public? What was the motivation of disclosure in their personal sphere. And we looked at the relationship they actually had with their technology. How do they perceive that? So for them, using the technology is part of self-development. Yes, I have my Fitbit. Yes, I know that they're taking my data, but hey, look how much I have to gain from using this technology. So, and actually, that technology is my assistant. It's not theirs, it's mine. It serves me. I am the master of that technology. That is their perception. So it's not between me and God, but it's between me and my technology. And the fundamental criteria for this trust towards this technology is that technology is fully under the user's control, it has no agency, it's discrete by default, so it doesn't popularize my raw data to somebody else. It acts on our behalf, on my behalf, not others' behalf, serves my interest, interacts solely with me, not with my intimate sphere, not with I have full control over my technology. That is the prerequisite for using that technology, even selecting that technology. So from the intimate sphere, disclosure was about friendly competition, between me and my partner. We both have Fitbits, and we create a mini competition. For example, how many steps we did, how far we ran. So it's about, bringing us closer together by doing some sort of activity together. So mini competition or camaraderie was the motivation for disclosure. But we do not publicize our raw data, we publicize our achievements. Look what I did, how much I achieved in relation to how much you achieved. That is the point. And the others only have read-only access of these achievements. They don't take part in the management of the raw data of my Fitbit, for example. Yes. And other family members and partner are also life logging. We do not share that kind of achievements with people who do not engage in the same activity with us. We are part only within people within the clique. Others in the semi-private sphere, the motivation was to create usually an online persona and to summon, help, or inspire others. That was the motivation for disclosing stuff for example, on Facebook, on blogs, so on and so forth. Only the achievements were publicized when we felt that we were short of our expectations, or users felt that they are short of their expectations, they didn't achieve something. There was no disclosure. And that fits very well with the idea of managing my self-image. I only portray me in a good light to my private sphere, because it's all about image, it's not about creating intimacy. And the other's trustworthiness was important, but also I needed to have full control over the information flow, how much is disclosed and how much is contained. And then there are, in the public sphere, it's all about social participation. So everybody has Fitbit. Like I was telling our secretaries in my department, they all have also Fitbit because we do all sorts of wearables research, we even create. So everybody in the department, even the people who do not actively sort of create the wearables or do the research, they are part of this community. So it's all about the social participation of the department in our case. So companies is, and that comes back to also how the companies, like the wearable companies, manage our data and what are the expectations from them. So we have certain expectations about wearables, especially wearable companies, that they will secure our data, so they're not going to be hacked, so they need to invest in that. They do not pass them on. We don't want them to pass them on. We know that there have been cases like this, but we don't agree with that. Analyze them for the benefit of the user. What do I get back for giving you my data? How do you help me? Aggregate them to generate knowledge with a common good. That's an acceptable reason for sharing and using and analyzing our data. And that you respect all sorts of law protection mandates, and that you have a moral code about using our data for good and not for bad. And sometimes we kind of sideline the fact that there are abuses. We see them as abuses, right? Not as a matter of fact. So in brief, the takeaway messages in terms of the technology design, it was a matter of master and servants. Technology, wearables should be our servants, and we expect to be their masters. That's it. Content sensitivity differs from person to person. For example, we realize that women running in a park want to disclose the GPS because it was part, for example, of their safety. They let other people know that this is where I am, so if something happens, watch out. Men didn't have this fear of being attacked in the park, so they didn't care about disclosing. They actually wanted to, that's for me. No matter how intimate our relationship, our data we only grant read-only access. You don't manage our data, we manage our data. We log or we disclose to impress, sometimes even to impress ourselves. So there were people who were doing this to say, you see, I'm not that bad, I'm actually doing my 10,000 steps, or almost there. So we do it to make, there's a feel-good factor about doing that, live logging. And reciprocity rocks. So it's easier to disclose to other people who also disclose their own data to us or their own achievement to us. And it doesn't matter whether it is intimate or it is within other live loggers. So in the meetups, for example, there's a lot of intimate information portrayed because the other person will also portray their own private information. Even though it's not an intimate relationship, it's a semi-private kind of zone relationship. And that was the presentation. Thank you.
Do we have questions?
Thank you for a great presentation. I think a lot of what comes up here makes intuitively a lot of sense. In that sense, not maybe so much new because we've heard bits and parts of it of what people expect. So I guess I have two questions. Did you then ask people, because I know there have been studies about this where they then say, but this is what actually happens to your data, and then see how people react? That would be really interesting. And then what are you going to use this for? What are the implications of these results? Is it going to be that then we can have the companies, for example, they could say, well, then we can have different products and people can pay different prices according to their different privacy attitudes and this kinds of things. So I was just wondering if you could reflect a bit further on the implications of the results.
Yes, I mean, the interviews were with, we call them high frequency users, usually people from the meetups. So heavy users or regular everyday live loggers. So they were very aware about that they're sharing the information. The general attitude within the meetups, because we had a discussion after that, is like, I don't care. It's so important for me to improve myself that I don't care about privacy. They will know, if they want to find out, they will know. They have a very blasé sort of attitude towards privacy. The non-regular, like the low frequency users, people who do it, every so often or for kind of shorter periods of time, they are not so much aware about them granting sort of the data to their Fitbit. So it does make them think, but they wouldn't change their usage. Again, because the motivation to do it, or you are in a competing relationship with your friends and everybody else is doing it, and that supersedes your privacy concerns. So if there's gonna be a privacy harm, we are gonna fall into this. So there is this attitude that sociability supersedes privacy. Now, what we are going to do with that, because our project is about, yes, privacy, but also business models. So we want to create a privacy respectful platform that can monetize personal life logging data for the individuals and also for the companies, because we know that there are companies like insurance companies that really want access to this data. But at the moment where it's going is to be non-privacy friendly, you know. So can we have, what is the user's requirements, privacy requirements, and can we put them together in a platform that respects their privacy? And what would be these requirements? So this is the stage 2 of that research, basically. Make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Then I wanted to ask, oh, sorry, yeah.
Hi, it's an interesting sort of project in that sense, trying to marry these two things which are often in conflict. I'm kind of wondering in terms of what history has shown what companies do with data, even the best of intentions, data leaks, data moves around, companies close down, they sell the data off to third parties. I'm kind of wondering actually, is this realizable? I share the same desire, but I'm kind of thinking, is this actually going to work in practice, given what we've seen so far?
It will not happen because Open University is going to create a platform, right? There needs to be a lot of different things that come together. The one thing that is coming together is advancements in the legal profession with the GDPR, changes in the privacy, data protection laws of Europe, not so much in America, but anyway, there's progress about how the law can hold accountable, if you like, companies for personal data misuse, but also making them to be way more explicit about requiring your consent, your explicit consent, as opposed to you having to read the small letters and read between the lines. Having said that, so far there was not a single privacy case won in courts, but the developments are still, you know, these legal developments are not even in effect yet. They're going to be in 2008. So all the companies are preparing for changing the systems and the way they're asking users consent. What will happen? I don't know. Will the companies abuse? Most likely. But it's just a convergence of different factors. I don't know the answer. We're just working towards that. Actually, the most important thing is not consent anymore or privacy per se, but it's actually discrimination, because that is the problem. The problem is not that you're going to get my data or pass it on. The problem is that you're going to, based on my data, create, brand me as something, label me as something, and therefore you're not going to give me insurance, or I will have to pay for my health insurance, and it's just not just health as it has been for up to now. Like with wearables, we're going to move to grounding information about like our expenses, for example, from banks. So it's moving to the financial sector. Imagine what will happen with health data and spending data will come together. So early days for that. Anything can happen. It will depend on us to some extent. How activist we're going to be about that.
Any other questions? I just have a very, very short one. When you were describing the zones before you moved to the empirical part, the private zone, intimate zone, I was just wondering this slide, how flexible did you ask your participants how flexible they are, whether their boundaries change within time?
We did not ask them about these zones. That was a framework that we used after the interviews. That framework is derived from how the legal profession kind of sections, if you like, zones. The very author actually asked me this question because yes, they're not strict boundaries. So, for example, there are life loggers in the meetups that will disclose in the meetups what they're doing with the life logging data, but not to the partners, because she doesn't care, but you people here care. So in some senses you see more disclosure within the semi-private sphere because of the common interest, but not necessarily with your mother, father, partner, because they're outside of the club. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi everybody again. As I said before, my name is Katrina Marcella. I'm a PhD candidate in BI Norwegian Business School, and together with my colleague, Assistant Professor Christoph Lutz, we're going to be presenting a paper that's called A Quantum of Self, a study on self-quantification and self-disclosure. When we talk about self-quantification in this paper, we actually use this term in sense of self-tracking. So just to sort of cut the discussion about the construct definition, we refer to the collection, analysis, and reflection of the data. And we know that self-tracking is not a new phenomena per se, right? People have been keeping their account books, medical journals, personal diaries since time they developed systems to record information. What is new about self-tracking, we believe, is the scope of it. That in 2019 we're going to have 3 times more wearable devices than we had 2 years ago. And in addition to that, the variety of contexts, and we've talked about it a lot yesterday, and Deborah Lappen mentioned it, that variety of contexts and dimensions that we can track is pretty impressive. With different apps and wearable technologies, you can log data about your health, about your workouts, about your finances, even about your sex life. And because Tali covered a little bit about the courts and the privacy, I don't know if you are aware of the app called WeVibe. It's a Canadian app. Basically, the company WeVibe, they design adult pleasure toys. And an app is a complementary product. So your partner could use this app to basically control and manage your experience with a toy. And in March, this company settled in court with its customers, and they will pay $4 million to their customers for violating their privacy. What they were basically doing is recording data that their customers did not give consent to record, about the temperature of the bodies, frequency, not only frequency of use, but also like what modes were used in an app. So what is interesting and what interested me and Christoph in this self-quantification context is that by collecting this rich data about various aspects of your life, you disclose all this information at the same time to an app or to a wearable, to a company that stands behind it. And we were interested in 2 things, basically. First is, what are the individual differences between people? What are the psychological profiles of people who decide to engage in self-quantification? So what traits of character they have? And second, what implications this disclosure has on our everyday behavior? Specifically, if you are a frequent self-quantifier, if you track a lot of data or over a period of time, or use multiple devices and applications, whether that will have a certain spillover effect, and in other areas of life, in contexts that are not associated with personal tracking, whether you will disclose more information. In other words, if you meet a person on the street and you start talking to them, whether the fact that they are self-quantifiers would to some extent predict how much personal information they will disclose in the interpersonal interaction. Or, for example, whether self-quantifier would disclose more than a non-self-quantifier in the context of filling in information when applying for loyalty program and things like that. Our paper is empirical. We did an MTurk study, and Christoph will cover a lot about methodology. I will take you through our research questions and hypothesis derivation, at least part of them. So when thinking about psychological profiles, we took out as a starting point the Big 5 model, personality traits, and we started reading self-quantification and self-tracking literature on motivations, on actual use of wearables and apps, and we landed on several hypotheses. We know from a HCI paper by Lee, the multi-stage model of personal informatics, that data collection actually requires quite a lot of discipline, organization, personal order, right? Because you actually have to make an effort, cognitive effort to log your data. Even if it's automatic, there are still majority of apps require some input from you. And there is a personality trait that is responsible, that actually covers all this discipline, responsibility, level of organization, and it's called conscientiousness, right? So we hypothesized that conscientiousness would be positively associated with self-quantification. From studies on motivation to engage in self-tracking or self-quantification, we know that natural curiosity and search for new experiences are quite often named as motivations to start tracking. That's why we expected openness to new experiences to have as well positive association with self-quantification. From yesterday's presentation and other literature, we've established that health and wellness is probably two most common contexts for self-quantification, and that's sort of very natural, right? Because it is related to our most important human assets. So, and quite often people start quantifying because they have some sort of challenges or problems, or maybe just questions that they want to resolve, and maybe take a little bit more control of these things they don't know. That's why we expected that emotional stability will have a negative effect on self-quantification, meaning that people who have, for example, emotional challenges would be more prone to engage in self-quantification, to take control of them. We've discussed a lot about privacy and about granting access to devices and to wearable technologies to record our information and to store it. And trust is really important in this regard, right? Because if you give your consent that yes, your information can be recorded and stored in some server in the galaxy far, far away, in this case, you need to trust has a positive effect on self-quantification, and it's kind of intuitive. And since trust is one facet of the construct called agreeableness, we expected them to be positively related too. Finally, from the paper by Lomberg and Franzen, we know that the tracking data, and it's a very communicative phenomenon, because you interact with the device, you interact with the community if you decide to disclose your data to community, and you interact in a way with yourself, because you learn information about yourself and you act on it. So we expected extroversion, because communicativeness is a part of the extroversion context, to have a positive effect on self-quantification. As you can see, our paper, it's empirical, and to our knowledge, it's the first study that actually links personality traits. It's exploratory, so if you have any suggestions, feel free to jump in. The brief summary of the hypothesis: conscientiousness, openness to new experiences, agreeableness, and extroversion were expected to have positive effect, while emotional stability negative effect. And a second part of our project is about the disclosure in situations unrelated to personal quantification. And and you, Tali, you mentioned about it, that self-quantifiers, so people who track information about themselves, they are very data-minded, right? They believe sometimes that the more raw data they feed, the more accurate or more precise result or recommendations they may get. That's why they see certain benefits in disclosure of information. In addition, people who track their performances share this belief that their data can contribute to collective value projects. So their information is just a part of a larger information system, and by disclosing this information, they are contributing to common good, to helping others learn more about things that we didn't know about our bodies and mind. That's why we expected that self-quantification would have a positive effect on self-disclosure, because people see benefits and because they also see their personal contribution. Now I'll hand over the word to my colleague, and he'll take you through another set of hypotheses.
Thank you, Katrina. So the second part of our presentation will be about privacy. Since we are in a session on privacy, I will very briefly talk you through some basic ideas and concepts when it comes to privacy. We've heard a lot from Tali already. But what we can say from the literature, there's actually a really long tradition of privacy scholarship going back to the 19th century even. And still today people are struggling with finding a common definition, or actually even finding a definition what privacy is, so it's very hard to define.
Just a second, the microphone's muted.
Thank you. So and coming with that, it's also very interdisciplinary. So we see that privacy is being researched in more technical disciplines like computer science, engineering, but then again we have different humanities and social science disciplines involved. Legal studies, we've heard in law, it's a really big topic at the moment with data protection laws. But also in sociology and communication, privacy has become a very important issue. So we see that there's a really steep increase in the number of publications across different disciplines. And me coming from sociology and communication, for me privacy is also a really important topic. Then the literature distinguishes between different types or forms of privacy. We saw before that certain typologies distinguish different spaces, like more intimate spaces and more public spaces. And one really common typology of privacy distinguishes between informational privacy, physical privacy, social privacy, and also psychological privacy. But today we are talking a lot about informational privacy, so about personal data, what personal data means, how much personal data people disclose on the internet or through self-quantification applications. But physical privacy, with some new developments regarding the internet of things, sharing economy, is somehow coming back. So physical privacy, the idea of having your private spaces, private rooms, your personal spaces being invaded by someone else, and that plays quite an important role. But in our study we focused mainly on laser pointer doesn't work, but we focused on informational privacy, so about data, what kind of data people disclose. Empirically, there's been a lot of research lately on the privacy paradox. So privacy paradox describes the difference between attitudes and behavior when people interact online, also in the physical world. So what we see is that a lot of people are really concerned about privacy, or at least that's what they say in surveys. So in the United States, in Europe, they're up to 90% being concerned or very concerned about their personal data being abused, being sold to third parties, being used in unwanted ways. But at the same time, a lot of people disclose a lot of personal information as well. So there's a clear divergence between people's attitudes and behavior. And we, in our study, we also took the notion of the privacy paradox as one element for our research model. A second important factor that I'm going to talk about briefly is trust. Again, we heard a little bit about trust earlier, but I want to give a very brief definition of trust. There are, like privacy, there are different definitions. A very conventional and widely used definition is by Rousseau and colleagues from an article in '98. And they define trust as a psychological state comprising the intention to accept vulnerability based upon positive expectations of the intentions or behaviors of another. So the key word here in my interpretation is vulnerability. So trust always involves a certain element of opening up, of making yourself vulnerable. For example, if you give a friend or colleague money with the expectation to get it back, you make yourself vulnerable to a certain extent. There's always a risk of not getting the money back. So trust is very important in situations with insecurity and uncertainty. Again, like with privacy, we can distinguish different types of trust. And here we relied on a typology by McKnight and colleagues, which is very widely used in management information systems. And they distinguish 4 different types of trust. Disposition to trust, institution-based trust, trusting beliefs, and trusting intentions. And for us, we were mainly interested in the institution-based trust. So this describes the trust in the institutions, in this case especially the internet, or the online system. We also, not in this paper, but in other research, trusting beliefs are often very important. So in that regard, we actually focused on institution-based trust. And what we saw as well in research, in previous research, is that privacy concerns and trust are related. So they are kind of very closely correlated. From that, very briefly, the main hypothesis of the paper. So as we saw with the privacy paradox, there should be a negative effect between privacy and self-disclosure. The same, we hypothesized, should apply for self-quantification. Then trust and privacy should also be negatively correlated. And finally, we had the two hypotheses on trust. Trust should foster actually self-quantification and also self-disclosure. And in the end, we also controlled for perceived information sensitivity. So as you see, there's a lot of hypotheses, 12 in total. Here you see the overall research model that we investigated. So, but to briefly summarize, as Katrina said, the big five are the first core aspect of our model, influencing self-quantification. And then we have privacy concerns and trust as the two other important factors in the model. Just very briefly, the methodology. As mentioned, we did a survey with about 500 participants. We measured the established things with established constructs. So for personality traits, we used an established scale. What's important to say is that self-disclosure was measured not with self-reported measures, but actually with people's actual disclosure behavior in the survey. So we asked them 12 different questions with varying sensitivity. For example, how much credit card debt do you have? Some questions very personal. How many sexual partners have you had? So some questions were really personal. And then the respondents could say, I don't want to answer, or they could fill in the information. We didn't analyze the information, but we actually looked at how many of these questions they answered and then built an index to see how much self-disclosure there was. Here you see the results. So we see that some of the hypotheses were confirmed or supported. Some of them we couldn't actually support. So if you look at the psychological predictors, big five, we see that only conscientiousness and emotional stability were significant. So people who are more conscientious are actually much more likely to do self-quantification. This was the strongest effect overall in the whole model. So people who are more kind of diligent when it comes to leading their lives are also more likely to self-quantify. Emotional stability was negative. So people who are less emotionally stable are more likely to self-quantify. The other three psychological variables didn't have a significant effect. But we saw that trust has a positive effect on self-quantification. Very interestingly, privacy concerns turned out to be positive. So people with more concerns about their privacy are more likely to self-quantify. So this was counter our intuition and our hypothesis. And we found that the information sensitivity is very strongly related to self-disclosure. So if people think that information is very sensitive, they are much less likely to disclose this information. But very, very importantly, we saw that self-quantification and self-disclosure are positively connected. So even outside the context of self-quantification, people are then more likely to actually disclose personal data. And I think with that, I hand over to Katrina again for the last part, for the discussion of the findings.
Thanks, Christoph. So very briefly, we've basically confirmed that, yes, self-quantification is a complex phenomena. It's multi-stage, and it doesn't just end at the context of personal quantification. It has implications further on. There are two personality traits, variables that are associated with self-quantification. It's conscientiousness and emotional stability. And what is interesting, we believe, is that these two traits, among those 5, they are actually related to selfhood, to your inner self. They are less interactivity or communication with other related. So self-quantification is positively associated with institution-based trust, which was intuitive, and we hypothesized it with privacy concerns, which, as Christoph said, was slightly counterintuitive. We think that an explanation for that we of course have to look deeper into this, but an explanation for this can be maybe the context bias. People who are actually interested in quantification, they would invest more effort, more resources, maybe in financial resources, to choose an app or a variable that they would trust. So even though they have privacy concerns and they are quite serious, because they invest in time and efforts into choosing platform or app or device that they trust, they would still quantify. And privacy concerns have negative effect on trust, which was hypothesized. More importantly, self-quantification affects self-disclosure in the context that is beyond personal quantification. So people tend to disclose more. And one of the reasons, one of the explanations for this may be if they do that frequently, or if they engage with more devices or more apps simultaneously, they develop a habit. So they see the benefits and they developed a habit of disclosing personal information. And this led us with our conclusions, this led us to our final questions that maybe we will focus on it in our future research. So considering that self-quantification is quite often discussed in the context of optimization, improvement, gaining control over life. Considering that self-quantification has implications on disclosure of information in other contexts, do we actually gain more control of our life? Or is it possible that we, to some extent, lose control over it? Thank you very much. I think we have maybe 5-6 minutes for questions. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I had 2 questions. First of all, I was wondering about the directionality of the association, because, for example, when you ended with self-disclosure, what did you say? Self-quantification affects self-disclosure. Could that also be something that works the other way around? That because people are more self-disclosing, they do self-quantification, or is it the other way around? Or do you just look at the association? So how do you see the causality in here? And I think that maybe with the whole model is the idea that certain personalities would engage with self-tracking, or that self-tracking creates the expression of certain personality traits. So that directionality of the results in the model was what I was interested in. And the other thing, I really like the definition of trust, and it made me think about the role of intentionality, or the notion of the intention of the institution, and how that has a particular effect on the way in which people engage with that institution, and how this sense of self-tracking having a common good or a greater good goal could be something that may be put forward as an intention of the institution in order to generate more trust, as it were, rather than just referencing a particular goal. So I was wondering if you had any reflections on the creation of trust by institutions through appeal to the common good beyond that common good in and of itself.
Thanks. I take the first one, you take the second one?
Okay.
With regards to the first question, it's basically what you're talking about is reverse causality, right?
Right.
That's very important, and we in our paper we try to be very, very careful with all this causality extravaganza, because basically methodologically speaking, right, you can talk about causality when you have, for example, experimental research design, when you actually can say that there is a certain manipulation and that has an effect on your dependent variable. We don't have it here, right? We have a survey and structural equation model. We are considering conducting an experiment to address this concern. Partially because we used psychological traits, and basically we measured their effect on self-quantification. In this way, controlled that for effective self-disclosure. We thought that we alleviated in a way that thing. But yeah, that's a very good question, whether self-quantification actually has effect on certain personality traits as well. But personality is a very sort of robust construct, right? To say that personality changes in process of self-quantification, it's a very serious claim. So that's why we believe that actually it's the other way around. It's how we suggest that it's certain personality trait that make you more like predisposed to engage in self-quantification.
Yes, I mean the way we, as Katrina said, this is a survey-based study, so we don't have a way of really making sure that causality is not the other way around. I mean the way we try to do is just conceptually really trying to develop the hypothesis very carefully from the literature based on plausible mechanisms. And I agree with you. I mean, we could also argue that self-disclosure affects self-quantification. So we probably need longitudinal data to do that, which we don't have, but which we hopefully will have at some point in the future. Regarding your second question about trust, yes, I absolutely agree that's a point to consider. We didn't really address it in the paper very much, what the roles of the institutions might be and how they might play in that regard. Yeah, trust, as I said, is a very complex phenomenon, with vulnerability being a very central aspect. And for me, I mean, it'd be interesting to follow up with maybe a kind of a collaboration with a company or an institution that does self-tracking to see how they might play in more strongly.
We have another question. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your study. It's very interesting. Just out of curiosity, how did you assess emotional stability in your survey?
We did 5. We have actually here. Yeah, we did not the big one, not the full personality characteristic test, but we took I think the article is called the very brief measurement of big 5 personality characteristics. So we took that, like it's emotional stability or neuroticism, right, in other words. So here we have I'm calm and emotionally stable, I'm anxious and easily upset.
And as a permanent state of being, or
you mean like situationally in that?
No, I mean emotional stability. I would argue is variable. So
yeah, absolutely.
Right now I might be sympathetic and warm, but a minute later or tomorrow I might be anxious and easily upset. So how is that even possible in a survey?
That is true. For that purpose, actually, there is a scale. It's called PANAS. It's a mood, basically a scale designed to control for mood in a situation, and you can adopt it at this very moment or during the last week on average or in a month. I don't think we had it in the survey in place, so we did not control for the situational thing. I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I don't remember, to be honest. But yeah, we referred more to sort of like general.
Yeah, but that's what I'm wondering, whether emotionals can generally be assessed, or whether it is context dependent. In general, so but it's just a question.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
That's
it's probably very situation specific. But the theory, I mean, psychological trait theory assumes that certain emotional traits are relatively stable, and this is kind of a very simple way of measuring them. So we know it's not optimal, it's not ideal, but there's also the issue of just the practical aspects of measuring them. And in a survey where you want to measure them relatively quickly, but still well, we had to make the trade-off and basically rely on an established way of measuring them. And I mean, yes, completely agree with you. It's not perfect. It's variation.
But it's a really good comment, and I think when we do the like if we do the experiment, sort of as a validation of this, we'll incorporate the situational variables too. I think we have to close our part, so Nana has a presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, thank you for sticking around for this third presentation. Thank you to the two previous presenters. And in the first presentation, this is a really interesting session so far, so I'll try to live up to it. My name is Nana Gorm. I'm a PhD student at the IT University of Copenhagen. And my PhD research focuses on self-tracking. Surprise, surprise. I look at self-tracking in everyday life, but I've also spent a lot of time looking at self-tracking in the workplace. In this presentation, I'll be presenting some of the main findings from a paper that was published at CHI this year, and then trying to reflect on how that fits with some of the research and some of the researchers at the conference that we are now attending. And then also talking about this private and pushed tracking, but I'll get into that. So, as many of you already know, self-tracking devices are now seeping into the workplaces in quite impressive numbers, and there have these now implemented as part of workplace health and wellness programs. So this means that the workplaces encourage their employees in one way or another to use self-tracking devices. This has gained a lot of attention both from researchers and in the media. Just a few clarifications, because this is such a new area, there are lots of different terms being used for the same things. So when I say workplace health and wellness programs, these are specifically the programs that are used in the workplaces to improve and promote health and fitness amongst the employees. These are usually offered through the workplace, or they can be directly connected to the insurance plans, and there can be incentives to participate. I refer broadly to health tracking because workplaces introduce a lot of different kinds of tracking. Usually this is some sort of automatic sensing, so this can be Fitbits, Jawbones, all of this. But some of the programs also include manual self-reporting, that you log on to a website and then you manually log something. So it doesn't have to be with the device, but it can be. In our study that I will be talking about in a minute, we also interviewed and talked to wellness program administrators. And these are the people in the workplaces that actually administer and implement the programs. So this varies on the workplace how that works. Some people have this as their main job. If it's a very, very large company, what they do is to promote health in this particular workplace. Some people have it as an added job responsibility. Maybe they work in HR and then they work with health of the employees next to it. And in some workplaces, it's even just a few of the employees who got together and thought, let's try to have a step counting campaign or something. But broadly, we call them wellness program administrators, so the people who make sure that these, or who work with implementing the workplace health and wellness programs. Okay, so looking at the literature, Deborah Lupton has pointed out that there are now these different and various kinds of tracking. There's private self-tracking, which is self-initiated, self-motivated, and you do it mainly for in your own private sphere, you could say. Now there's also more of what she refers to as pushed self-tracking. So someone who heavily encourages you to do some tracking. This can be in the workplace, but this can also be a well-meaning wife or husband who gives you a Fitbit for Christmas and say, maybe you should, and then there's imposed, which is where you have little choice whether you want to participate in this self-tracking or not. And I'll get into a little bit with the boundaries between these later. We also see some research coming out now that is very concerned with these developments and saying basically we need more research in this area to figure out what's going on and what are actually the implications of these types of tracking. So we heard this call and we thought, well, let's actually ask the employees who are already now using these devices in the workplace, what are their experiences? and what is actually going on. So I've done one observational study in Denmark of a step counting campaign. That's in a different paper, and I'm happy to talk about that. But today I'll be focusing on this paper that was recently published, which I conducted the study in collaboration with researchers from the University of Washington in Seattle, Christina Chung and Sean Munson, and my advisor, Irina Slavsky. So what we did, we wanted to do this study in the US because they have many different ways of implementing this workplace initiated self-tracking. So we wanted to know more about what's actually going on. First, we conducted exploratory interviews. So we interviewed 7 employees and 3 wellness program administrators. And these were from 7 different companies, just to get a sense of what's going on and what can we ask about and what are maybe some interesting themes. Based on this, we conducted a survey. And we ended up getting 539 employee responses and 45 wellness program administrator responses. And based on those responses, we then also conducted follow-up interviews with 9 employees and 2 wellness program administrators. So this is the empirical work that I'll be talking about from now on. So first, just a little bit of background. There are many different ways of implementing health tracking in the workplace. We found at least 3 in the companies that we investigated. First, there is, you can say, the most low intensity level, which is subsidizing activity trackers or gym memberships. So that means that, for example, employees could get a cheap tracker, even a tracker for free, or they could get a free gym membership, some combination of this, but the company didn't care how they used it, and they never reported any data back to the workplace. The second one, we saw that some companies then offered short-term events or challenges. So this would be a 3-week step counting campaign, an event where you go for a walk together, something like this. Often this would be between 1 to 3 months, and you would then get a gift certificate or even a cash reward. And very often this would also be team-based, so the team that then did best would get some sort of special prize. Finally, we also did see, and I haven't seen this in Denmark so far, but we saw this in the US, that there are these more long-term programs, so where tracking is supposed to be done over longer periods of time. And this was often incentive-based, so you had to report back the data that the device collected. For example, the 1 step could equal 1 point. And then depending on which company you're in, which program they have, which health insurance, you could either get some virtual points, you could get company swag like a water bottle with a logo or a t-shirt or something like this. And some then also said, well, you get a discount on your insurance if you walk a certain amount of steps. So that's just to chart out the space of how differently this is actually done. From these interviews and surveys, we have 3 main findings. We have more in the paper, and I'm also happy to take questions afterwards, but for now I'll just focus on 3 main findings. So we found very clearly that prior experience affects employee attitudes, and maybe this is not so surprising, but it was very clear to us that in the first one, for example, if you already had experience with tracking on pen and paper, and you are already positively attuned to this, then you've perhaps heard so much about self-tracking and wearables and all of this, then it seems kind of cool or kind of interesting, and then you can switch to the automatic sensing and you can try it out in the workplace, and then you're positively motivated to try it out in the workplace. However, if some employees explained that they had very negative experiences previously with self-tracking, and of course, then when it was offered in the workplace, they weren't very positive towards this development. Finally, we also found that a lot of people were already tracking, but they didn't want to participate in the workplace program. So we tend to say that, oh, tracking is now entering the workplace. It's already there. People are already tracking and using it somehow, and all the experiences that they have influence what they then experience in the workplace. So looking across this data, we wanted to know, well, what do employees feel they get from participating? A lot of the participants said, well, we feel that it shows that our company cares. A lot of them said, we sit down too much, I can feel my back aching, and this is actually a way for me to talk about health at work. And then in connection to that, health tracking helps increase awareness of fitness level. There are so many competing things in your everyday life that you want to prioritize, and you know, or many of the employees at least felt that they should be doing more, but simply other things just took up too much time. So this was a way for them to prioritize health, that it was okay to talk about health at work, that it was okay to say, let's actually go for a walk and talk meeting instead of just sitting still. And then sure, some said, yes, the financial motives or incentives are actually motivating. And then it developed this self and social accountability, so you were accountable in a way, again, thinking about the different priorities that are competing in your everyday life, that this actually made you stick to something important, or what some of the employees felt was important to them. In our survey, we also asked those who were in workplaces where self-tracking was encouraged, but who chose not to do self-tracking. So this was quite interesting. So for those who are in workplaces where you could participate in self-tracking, why didn't they want to do this? And we gave participants the opportunity to give more than one answer. So this is why this is not adding up to 100%. So, but out of all of the responses, 51% of them said, I don't want to participate because I'm concerned about my time. I already have too much to do. 28% said, well, I'm already active. I already feel like I am doing enough, so I don't have to have more encouragement. Or they had different health goals. And this is actually quite important because a lot of the tracking is still focused on steps. Because this is easily implemented, all of this, this is what most trackers track. And they said, well, I want to do more yoga, or I want to do something else, and this is not tracked, and it's just going to be double work for me. 18% that said just tracking is just not interesting to me. I don't want to do this. And 16% also said that there are technical challenges or uncertainties, so they didn't know where to sign up. They weren't quite really sure how the device worked, and they didn't know where to go with those questions. So it was not necessarily that they didn't want to, but they just didn't really get around to it. And then finally we saw 4% said, well, this is out of a concern somehow of privacy. We had expected that out of those who are in workplaces that offer incentivized self-tracking, but those who chose not to participate, that a larger proportion of this would be due to privacy concerns. But actually this turned out to be quite low. So we wondered why is that actually? We could see that out of those that did have privacy concerns, they said, well, they were concerned that health tracking would blur the boundaries between personal and work life. They didn't like the feeling of being monitored. And a few also mentioned that they didn't like the idea of their data being shared with a third party. So sometimes, for example, Fitbit, they have their own company wellness program, but sometimes it's also a different company. So you have lots of people actually potentially looking at this data. You have, of course, yourself, you have the workplace, then you have the program that administers the data, and then you have the Fitbit device that collects the data. So there's a lot going on that they weren't really sure about. But you could also say, why weren't there more that were actually concerned about this? When you hear about it in the media, when we talk about it, the knee-jerk reaction is to be very concerned with privacy. What we speculate is that at this point in the workplaces, what people experience now is that they're actually more concerned with the fact that the programs, they don't seem to fit what they want. So for example, if you want to do more gardening or you want to do more yoga, then that doesn't fit with the program, and you see that as a bigger barrier. You don't even get to the point where you try it out and you think about these privacy concerns. So maybe there'll be more privacy concerns as the programs evolve and as they become a larger part of workplaces. We also talked a lot to the program administrators, and they were very, very concerned and adamant that the information about how they use the data, how the data is collected, that this was communicated very, very clearly to their employees. They very often said, we don't use this data. We want to know how many people are in the program, so we can tell that to the board of directors, so we can say that we're doing something to try to keep people healthy, but we're not actually at this point looking at the data or using it for anything. Again, it's mostly steps. So a lot of the employees said, well, we trust that our workplace is not using this data. They're telling us that they're not using this data, and the administrators told us that they're not using this data. Not to say that maybe at some point they will, but at least at this point, there was this very minimal data use. We also saw a mismatch, you could say, of expectations that those that then did participate in the program, they actually expected that then they would get something in return. That if I do track this data, if I do give this to you, then why don't you give me personalized support? I want to talk to a fitness expert. I want to actually have this data used for something. So there's definitely a challenge in the future for balancing this field. So, as I said in the beginning, Deborah Lobsman has started to talk about this different kinds of tracking, and she herself says that there's a fine line between pushed self-tracking and imposed self-tracking. And of course, that's what we're talking about in the workplace, right? Is it actually voluntary? Do people actually voluntarily sign up for this? I want to raise the question here today and at this conference that maybe there's also a fine line between private self-tracking and these other modes of self-tracking, because people now have so many, at least in the workplaces that invest in self-tracking, a lot of these employees already have experience with self-tracking. So perhaps these modes are already blurring and they have spillover effects, and your previous experiences spill over into how you perceive what's going on in the workplace. So how can we understand better the interplay between different types of tracking? Maybe not have it as clearly with these, then there's private and then there's pushed. How can we understand that better? And then going back to some of the critical literature in this area, I would ask, how can we stay critical of this development, which is definitely important, but also understand and explore further that some employees are actually really happy to be doing tracking in the workplace, at least at this point, at this stage, with looking at steps and a few simple things, that they do feel it gives them a space to talk about health in the workplace. How can we make sure that we stay critical of the development, but also respect that this is something that some people do actually get something out of? So these are the questions that I've wanted to bring to the session today. I'm happy to take questions or comments, and I've also left the citations for the paper that I've been referring to and some of my other workplace papers. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. This is extremely interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit about the companies who participated in the study, in your study, and particularly the employees? Mm-hmm. What type of employees?
Yeah. Thank you. So these tend to be bigger companies and office work mostly. These were the ones that we could get our hands on, so to speak, so far, because these are the companies where it's more organized and where they really, push forward and say we should try self-tracking and let's try to make this work in our company. So most of the companies in this study are large companies, and most of the employees were office work. So there's definitely going to be different responses depending on what workplaces you look at.
And different levels of hierarchies also in the offices?
Yeah, that too, yeah. Yep.
Thanks, Nana. I was wondering if you could comment on, given that you've done research both in a Scandinavian setting and in the US, if you could comment on whether you see any cultural differences in the types of attitudes that employees have towards self-tracking.
Yes. So specifically in the workplace, it's interesting how actually usually when I go abroad and I tell about the Danish health system and I say we have so much data about people and self-tracking and all of the, just in general, we have a lot of health data, and especially in the US, they say, do you really just trust the system and all of this? And then when I'm in Denmark and I say, well, they actually have this incentivized health tracking in the US, and they say, oh, do they really trust this? I think maybe and this is maybe a very broad generalization, that in Denmark or the Scandinavian countries, we tend to trust more like the official health systems and the governments, not so much private companies. Which maybe in the US they're okay with sharing some of their data with private companies more than their government. And of course this is also connected to the way that they have their health insurance, right? So in the US you have your health insurance in or via the workplace. So you also sort of see that, well, if I do something to improve my health, then actually my company has fewer expenses, and then that actually also sort of supports the company in a way. And I don't know if Danish employees would think in the same way, because for us health insurance is a different thing. There are definitely cultural differences, and something that would be very, very interesting to look into more, especially as a lot of these programs are developed in the US and now being implemented in Scandinavian systems. This study was also supported by an insurance company that gave us some money and didn't say how we should do it, but they were interested in the results. And I know that they're looking into, in the Finnish market, but also in the Danish market, how can we implement this? So being aware of the cultural differences is definitely very important. Yeah.
And do you know anything about the prevalence of these initiatives? How many companies actually have them? And also whether this is more like a US thing, or if it's already here in Europe as well?
It is already in some parts of Europe and in different ways, but it's definitely more prevalent in the US. I don't have the numbers. This is moving very quickly, so I don't have any clear numbers yet. But other than that, I also know that there are companies that are looking into implementing this somehow in Denmark too. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering if you, maybe not necessarily based on what you present now, but also on the whole work that you've done on this, is if there's any evidence, or you found any evidence of sort of direct link between all this and performance evaluation in work?
So whether people perform better,
or whether, for instance, they are more likely to be promoted if they come to engage with these sorts of programs. And I was particularly curious, but maybe it's something we can talk about later, about the sort of employee wellness person within the workplace, but let's stick to the first question.
So in terms of productivity, and this, no, I don't have numbers on this, and I think it's still very early days. So there's no way to tell whether the employees that walk more steps get promoted more often. We don't know.
The question pointed really at understanding whether companies are interested in, using these as evaluation tools in some form for.
Yeah. So the wellness. So the administrators that we talked to were not interested. They were first and foremost interested in getting people to be a little bit more active. But of course, the whole underlying logic is that if you're more active, maybe more healthy, then maybe you will be more productive, and that pays back to the company somehow. I know Chris Tiller has a wonderful chapter coming out about these like logics at work, with self-tracking in the workplace. I've seen one paper from a technical conference where they connected steps and data from HR management, so which project you're working on, and then comparing to how many steps you walked and how you sleep. And then that could be discussed with your manager in the next meeting. So we see that you haven't been sleeping very well. And then of course this is all phrased very positively. Maybe we could help assign you to a different project, or we could support you somehow. But it's very easy to see how that could also be misused, of course. So again, coming back to this very, very big challenge that I think we all agree that it is a big challenge, that people have very sedentary lives, and a lot of people want to walk more, and some people do feel supported by these technologies, but of course there's a very, very great risk that this could be misused, and of course some companies are looking into this, but right now we don't have a lot in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I have a question regarding like normative aspect of introducing health tracking at the workplace. I've read a paper recently, I think it was by Melanie Swan, I don't remember, so I can refer to it later if necessary. But these initiatives, of course, they have a lot of positive implications, but they also promote this healthism, right? Like, so health can be understood through also walking certain number of steps or doing certain amount of movements, including in workplace. And this sets a certain norm that it's okay, it should be like this. You have to walk this amount of steps while you're in your workplace. But of course, people differ and their understanding of health and what should be healthy differs. And in addition to that, there are also people with certain like medical conditions, for example, that cannot simply achieve the goal of these programs, and they do feel discriminated, right? So could you comment a little bit on that?
I'm very happy you asked, because this really clearly came out in the interviews with the program administrators. They were actually quite frustrated that they wanted to have like a broader view of health. They know that you're not just healthy just because you walk a certain amount of steps. And they wanted to implement lots and lots of things, but in the end what ended up being the focus was very often steps, because that's what the technologies that people can afford to buy, and that what a lot of the programs are set up to do, and it's very simplistic. But they were very, very keen to have a broader view of health, to have more things that could, where you could say, well, I don't walk a lot, but you know, I do a lot of meditation, or I do this and that, because you're right, there is definitely something normative in it, and then it becomes this weird standard goal of 10,000 steps, and they know it's not even achievable for everyone, and not everyone should even be doing it. So they were very concerned and very aware of this problem. And if you have a health promotion background, it's really annoying that there's only focus on steps, right? So it's very important that we keep talking about the context and other aspects of health as well. And we discussed this a little bit more in the paper too.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a really needed work, because there's very little work on workplaces. And one thing that is lacking in the literature is also a study of sociality, or like social relationship. And referring back to the discussion we had yesterday, do we have any kind of analysis of how it actually influences like relationship between people?
Yeah.
Because it create like different types of employees, like people who use it and then are more like critical of with people who don't use it. Does it seem to polarize like the working place into different groups?
So in this particular study, we weren't able to go into that too much because it's a survey, but I've done this one, 2016, was in a step counting campaign in Denmark, where actually I hung out in an office for 3 weeks where they did this step counting campaign. So that was a really interesting experience, but I could tell how it changed the dynamics of the workplace, because a lot of them did participate, but some of them didn't. So it was actually harder for them to talk to the employees who were participating in the campaign, because they were talking about steps, and if you didn't walk steps, or you didn't count your steps, then it was really, really hard. So there were definitely influences in the workplace over that period of time. And it changed the accountabilities a lot over those 3 weeks. And they were all very relieved when those 3 weeks were done, and then when they could leave their trackers. But then some of them participated again when the step counting campaign came back later in the year. So it definitely does have an influence, also just in the everyday office work. But I have some more on that in the other paper, because that's definitely important to see, right? What actually happens in the workplace.
I think we have time for one brief.
It's actually just a comment, and so thanks, Dan. Nice to meet, getting an insight into what you actually work with. But it was just that when it comes to privacy, you guys are not the only ones who've been kind of surprised. At the first Quantified conference in 2011, Kelly said that when it comes to privacy, you might be thinking about it in kind of like a spectrum from privacy to utility, and that we will have to like find our own kind of preferences on that scale or that spectrum. And then last year, when his latest book, The Inevitable, came out, he was asked in some podcast, I think, about what had kind of like, what was the most surprising thing for him during the last 5-6 years while he'd been writing that book. He said well, it's that people consistently have been choosing utility over privacy.
Yeah.
He thought they would
Yeah.
be much more spread out over that spectrum, but when it comes to the actual choices, most people they choose the utility.
Definitely.
So he was surprised.
Yeah, we have this other, which is a short paper, which is changing privacy concerns over time, which deals again with this also. So that was in the Danish workplace in the step counting campaign. Again, we didn't see many privacy concerns. But what we noticed, because I did the observational study, was that privacy concerns changed. If you haven't tried step counting in the workplace, then you don't know how much steps actually say about your everyday life. So we had a participant, and I love this quote, where she said, well, my colleague asked me why I had so few steps on Sunday, and I had to tell her it was because I was hungover. Right? And I wouldn't necessarily have shared that with her, but so then she changed because she then understood what it actually meant. So it's, of course, when we go now and ask someone, are you concerned about this? Oh, there are all kinds of problematics when asking people about privacy. But, you know, it changes and evolves with what people experience. And yeah, maybe it is not so surprising that people don't have these concerns because they haven't really experienced anything worrisome yet, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I think we'll call it a day at this session. Thanks very much. Thanks for